Jim, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
You're the founder, CEO of Stewart Properties. You've been in commercial real estate, primarily multifamily, for over 40 years at this point. And you're also one of the founding shareholders of Enterprise Bank, which is the largest bank based out of St. Louis.
Initially, I brought in 3 different management companies to manage the property, but I really saw none of them manage it like they owned it. Nobody's going to manage it like an owner. And after 3 different ones that I fired over the course of a year and a half, I just said, I'm going to do this myself. I found some good people. You can make a tremendous living, ordinary income, brokering real estate, but you'll never get rich. You'll get rich by owning property, and generally for a long time. The holding period is so important. Very little real estate goes down over time.
Jim, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're an incredible entrepreneur, and you have, I think, an incredible story to tell. So I really do appreciate your time. I think this is going to be an amazing episode. You have some great stories. You're the founder, CEO of Stewart Properties. You've been in commercial real estate, primarily multifamily, for over 40 years at this point. And you're also one of the founding shareholders of Enterprise Bank, which is, I think, the largest bank based out of St. Louis. Before we get into all of that, I would love to hear more about you growing up in University City and your early experiences with entrepreneurship, if you don't mind sharing.
No, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me. I grew up in U City, one of 7 kids. And I think from an early age, just because I really didn't get anything from my parents money-wise, I was forced to be an entrepreneur, and I like money and buying things. So my first job was a paper boy in Clayton. And soon after that, my first experience with selling was I was on a baseball team when I was 12. And my dad knew the commissioner of the league, and we went to his house for some reason. And in his basement were thousands of candy bars. And these candy bars had been for fundraising for the league. Well, somehow they didn't get distributed. And I said to him, I don't know how I came up with it, but I said, hey, I'll buy these off you. They're $1. I'll give you 10 cents for the candy bars. The guy said, sure, I'll get rid of them. So I took probably thousands of candy bars home, went every day. It was during the summer. I put on my Little League uniform and go door to door to every Clayton office building and say, hi, I'm here selling candy bars for the Quarry League. And I think I sold 1,800 candy bars that summer. And,
Wow.
that was good tax-free money. So I had gotten kind of a taste of that, and I really liked that. So I went on, and one day I was in a magic shop and made friends with a magician and ended up buying some tricks and putting my own show together. I was Marcus the Magician and did hundreds of kids' birthday parties, Cub Scout blue and gold dinners. I even did it one summer on a cruise ship. And
Wow.
it was a lot of fun. I was on TV doing it, and it was a great job. A lot of funny stories happened at different times with that. One I'll tell you about that was interesting. At the end of the show, my finale, at one time, I had this trick where I had a live dove appear, and it appeared like he was in a balloon. Well, I'd blow up the balloon, put it on a tray, and I'd say, at the count of 3, kids, say the magic word. And if it was your birthday party, it would be happy birthday, Raj. So 1, 2, 3, I'd go like that, and boom, the balloon would burst and the dove would be flying and it would go right on my finger like that. And the kids would all say, oh, thank you. The bad news is I had these live doves, and when I first got them in 9th grade, I had a great interest in them. By my senior year of high school, I had a great interest in cars, women, and something called Budweiser. So I kind of ended up not as into the doves as possible. So they weren't quite taken care of as well as they should have been. So on this particular show, I'm at a kid's birthday party, and 1, 2, 3, boom, I go, and instead of the balloon busting out, the dove had died in the middle of the show, and it was catapult out. It would come out of the there's a small wood case and there was a spring. So instead of him springing and coming up and going right on my finger, it shot all the way across the room and hit a wall way over. And the kids all went, look at that. The dove hit the wall. And, I never forget seeing that dove hit the wall and the feathers going all over. And then all the kids looked back at me like, Marcus, what's going on? So I ran over and picked up the corpse and I kind of went, oh, he must have gotten sick, kids, during the show, And so a lot of funny stories, that kind of stuff happened all the time. But I also made a lot of money doing that at the time. And that helped pay for my first year at Mizzou. So,
just to pause real quick.
sure.
First of all, I apologize for laughing. I know that was a bit of a brutal story, but
Oh no, I
it's a
laugh
funny
at it
story,
now.
too.
It's
And then also, it sounds like from day one you were confident in your own abilities and kind of able to think outside of the box. Is that fair to say?
well, I think so. Yeah. The best thing that ever happened to my magic career was every Saturday I would go downtown St. Louis. I would hitchhike down. Back then, you could hitchhike. Now nobody would hitchhike. And I'd go to the magic shop and see other magicians, buy some tricks. So one day I was hitchhiking home, and a guy in a brand new Corvette picked me up downtown. He said, I live in the Central West End. He said, but I'll give you a ride to U City. So he gave me a ride all the way there. And he said, well, what are you doing downtown? I said, I was at a magic shop. He goes, oh, I love magic. He goes, would you show me a trick if I give you a ride to U City? That was the draw, I said, sure. So he drives me all the way out to U City, pulls over. I have a deck of cards. I did a couple tricks. He said, boy, those are great. He said, how would somebody contact you if they want you for a party? I said, here, I had business cards. I said, Marcus the Magician. I gave him my business card. On Monday, I come home from school. I was probably in 7th grade. And my mom goes, how do you know Jack Carney? I said, don't know anybody named Jack Carney. Jack Carney at the time was the biggest radio personality in St. Louis and much of the country. That's when KMOX was a blockbuster station, where it went, all over the Midwest. That man was Jack Carney. And on the air on Monday, he said, now I want you to know, over the weekend, I picked up the finest young magician I've ever met. His name's Marcus the Magician. And he went on and on. He gave my phone number over the air. And I had like 100 calls that night, And then, so I called him to thank him. And I said, Mr. Carney, thank you so much. I said, is there anything I could do? He goes, in fact, there is. My garage needs cleaning out. Here's where I live. And he was serious. So I went to his house on Saturday on Hortense Place, one of those huge mansions, and cleaned out this huge garage. But there was a benefit to that because I got to know him a little more. So after an awful day of cleaning out his garage, as I'm leaving, I go, Mr. Carney, I said, is there any way I could get a quote from you to put on my brochure that I sent out to the Cub Scout leaders and everybody else? He said, sure, come up with something, run it past me, just so, I approve of it. So for like a week, I doctored it. It had to be short and sweet at the top of my brochure. And I looked at all kinds of combinations. And I finally came up with, in it quotes, what a terrific addition to any party. And it said Jack Carney, KMOX. And I called him. He said, absolutely. And boy, that endorsement got me so much business from the community. And it was a great one. So I also learned how to get paid because sometimes at birthday parties, I think at the time I get $25 per birthday party. You got a lot more for bigger Cub Scout groups, but some people don't want to pay you exactly what you said, and you got to learn. Somebody said, "Oh no, you told me 20." After the show, after when I'm leaving, I said, "Oh no, it's 25." And you have to kind of in real estate the same thing. People are always trying to cut your commission when you're a broker. You just can't do that unless circumstances dictate that you should.
And I'm sure when you were having those negotiations over the $25 fee, you were a teen and you were dealing with adults, correct?
Absolutely.
And you still had the confidence to stick to what you initially agreed on? You didn't feel like you had to bend or...
No, and that only happened at the smaller shows. At Cub Scout Blue and Gold dinner, I mean, at our corporate show, I did some. It was more kids' birthday parties, and 80% of the people wouldn't do that, or 85, but 15 would try to fudge. But I knew I had finished my show, but the party was still going on. So here's the mother or occasionally the father who maybe was trying to knock down my fee. But while they were doing that too, there's a bunch of kids running around their house. They wanted to get back to the party. I wasn't moving until they paid me my fee, that we agreed upon. So I kind of had that knowledge.
Sure, makes sense. And then when you went to college, you were no longer Marcus the Magician,
Oh, I
correct?
did. Yeah. In
Okay.
college, I'd come back. I wouldn't come back for those kind of shows. I'd come back.
Sure.
I had a deal with the Cub Scouts. This is kind of fun that I could send out my mailing or my brochure that had Jack Carney on it to all the Cub Scout leaders all over. So in February's, I had sometimes 2, 3 shows a night at big dollars for me at that time, $125 a show. So a lot of times I would hitchhike back from Mizzou with my big magic box, and then I'd take the midnight Greyhound bus back to Columbia. And I learned a lesson from that also, how things work. One time I went, every year I'd go down to the Boy Scouts headquarters on Lindell. I'd give them my stuff. They'd say, yes, I had to pay postage and everything. One year I went down there and they said, we're not doing mailings for anybody anymore. I said, you're kidding. They said, no, somebody had sent out something kind of crazy. So, I mean, I was very upset. I'm walking out of the Cub Scout headquarters and I'm thinking, man, my income's going to drastically go down. Well, I look on the board of directors and I see a guy named William E. Merritt's. Merritt's company is huge in St. Louis. He was one of the biggest St. Louis powerhouse business guys. And I knew his nephew. So I went over to his nephew's house. We'd play baseball together. And his mom was Merritt's sister. And I said, is there any way I could get a meeting with your uncle? And she called him and Bill Merritt agreed to meet me. So my mom brought me out to Fenton to the big headquarters. She goes, now, how do you know Bill Merritt? I go, I don't know. I'm just meeting with him. And I was 15, went into his office. He greeted me like a king. This was the classiest guy in the world, And he said, Jim, what can I do for you? And I told him the story. He said, and he was on the board of the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts. And he said, I think we could probably make an exception to that. Let me check. And he picked up the phone, called the head of the whole district. He goes, I think Jim's offering a real good service. Let's go ahead and let him send out his stuff. And by the way, let's pay his postage too. So from then on, I was the only guy who got stuff sent out to the Cub Scouts, but it taught me how things work. This guy was on the board of directors. He instantly got me back in the driver's seat. So it's not always, what do they say? Not what you know, but who you know. So
it sounds like you were a natural connector or natural at networking. Like you didn't pick up a book and learn that you need to contact a guy like that, correct? It just kind of came natural to you, connecting the dots, if you will.
I think so. And, throughout my career when I was younger, I mean, I would go to every function I could. I'd stand at the front door. I'd see everybody because that's, when I was a broker, that's what you're doing. You're trying to get new customers and you have to work it. So connections are everything. I was on some boards and always, it's always easier to have a business deal when you're on the inside with somebody who likes you and wants you in there. So
that's definitely a big part of it. And then another big part of it is spotting opportunities, right? And it sounds like you were always good at spotting opportunities, whether it was with the candy bars or the light bulb story that you have from college.
Oh yeah.
If you can expand on that.
Yeah. One day when everybody's going home for summer vacation, I happened to go to the basement of our fraternity house, and there were thousands and thousands of light bulbs. Earlier in the year, they had said, okay, everybody get your parents to buy these light bulbs. You can go sell them, but the money will go to the fraternity. So they had all do it, but none of them, I mean, all their parents had paid for their college and, these are left in the basement of the fraternity house. So I asked the president, I said, could I buy these? He said, you can have most of them if you'll take them out of here. So I brought home, I don't know, several thousand light bulbs in little packages. And that was a busy summer for me. During the day, I worked for U-City Street Department. And as part of that job in the street department, on Mondays, the garbage men, the trash men would not show up because they had a pretty big weekend. And so the street department guys would have to be the trash men. So I worked as a trash man on Mondays, and it was awful. Now you have these nice little plastic bags and out by the curb. Back then, you had to go in the back of people's houses. You had to drag a big plastic um, can, take their heavy aluminum or metal cans, empty them, bring them back. It was awful. I mean, and it really showed me that's not what I wanted to do in life. But it was a great background. I mean, I love when a garbage man comes to my house. I said, "Hey, I once did that," and I don't want to say, but I think it kind of gives them hope that there's something else that could be out there for them. So, so I was a garbage man on Mondays, street department the rest of the week. Then I'd go after work carrying two big boxes of light bulbs, go door to door, and then I'd umpire a kid's baseball game at night. I got like $10 and hard working summer, but I made a lot of money and I needed it. I was paying my own way at school and it was a great summer.
And this was all while you were attending journalism school, correct?
Yes.
So you didn't set off wanting to be in real estate.
No, well, it's funny, Raj. I wanted to be a journalist, but then something major happened. A week before I went to Mizzou as a freshman, a fellow named Richard Nixon resigned the presidency. So all of journalism became investigative reporting, like Bob Woodard and all. Everybody wanted to be an investigative reporter, rat out people and everything. I didn't want to do that. So, but that was the whole focus of journalism after that. I was already in journalism school, so I stayed in there. I got a great writing background, and I enjoyed the stuff and got some pretty big scoops when I was doing the radio station down there. But it wasn't something I wanted to pursue. However, accidentally, I ended up pursuing it. My advisor at Mizzou was a former CBS newsman. And he was very amused that I was the only guy in the J school who didn't want to go into journalism. Yeah, and so we had a good rapport. And one day he called me probably a year out of school and said, "Jim, I know you don't want to go into journalism, but there's a great opportunity. And CBS in New York has an anchorman job where you'll travel all over the country doing shows for kids' news shows." He said, "I know you did magic shows. Why don't you send him a tape?" So on a Sunday morning after a Mizzou game, after a late night, believe me, I'm on the Walmart parking lot in Jefferson City, just kind of doing a man on the street thing, talking to people. And I had a friend of mine film it. I sent it to CBS, almost forgot about it. They said, "You're hired." I said, "You're kidding." So they brought me up there. They tested me one more time while I was up there. But that began a year of traveling around the U.S. doing a show called Going Places. And I would just, they set up these things. We had a van with a CBS logo on it, and we'd drive. Most of the time we flew, but they showed this van all the time. And, I interviewed Cajun folks in Louisiana and just all over the place. And it was a great show. And I'm still the only person to go from Mizzou Journalism School straight to a network job. And back then there were only 3 networks, and I was at CBS. So it was a real fluke. It was fun. I got showbiz in my system. I really enjoyed it. The bad news is there was a recession in 1982, and the first thing they cut is children's news shows. So I said, well, I kind of like this. So I went out to LA for a month. I moved out there, and I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I knocked on every door. I waited for people after hours. Till they left to go to their car in parking lots. I had nothing to lose. And I asked them all, and most of them agreed to see my tape. And I said, "How would I do out here? Am I good?" They said, "You're pretty good. You're as good as 10,000 other people out here. You may make it, you may not. What you have to do is be a bartender or a clothing salesman, and you may go on for years and not get it, and you have to really want it." And I thought, I don't like those odds. So I got my car heading back to St. Louis, and I had a U-Haul on the back of my car. So I'll never forget, I'm driving by the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. It was in November of 1980. And on the radio, they said, Ronald Reagan has just won the presidency. And he is celebrating, and he'll address the nation tonight from the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. Well, guess what? I was driving right by. the Century Plaza Hotel. So then I got nothing to lose, everything to gain, and I was dressed nicely, like in a suit almost for my last interview there. So I thought, I'll go in there. So it took me a while to find a place to park. I had a U-Haul driving. Then I finally found a place, and I walk in, and they have this big ballroom set up with everything, and one woman standing by a back entrance. And I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I went back there, and I said, excuse me, where's the president-elect? She goes, oh, he's back in his personal cocktail party with his friends back there. I don't know why I did this. I'm glad I did. But I said, well, I'm supposed to be back there with him. She said, well, who are you? I said, Bob Sullivan. I made up a name. She goes, oh, I don't see you on the list, Mr. Sullivan. I said, I'm supposed to be back there and I'm late. She goes, well, look, you take my pin and this will get you past the door and the Secret Service and you go on back there.
Wow.
Now, nothing like this could ever happen now, Raj. I mean, it just could, And even then, it's kind of outlandish, but it happened and it was crazy. I walk into a back room, probably 3 times the size of the small studio, maybe 4. There's all kinds of people, cocktail party, and I see in the far corner, there's Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. Whew. So there's a bar right here set up by that cocktail party. I'll get a drink and kind of blend in with the crowd. So I go up to the bartender. The guy looks up. It was Red Skelton, a famous comedian. You're too young to know of him, but he was huge. He was tending bar. So I said, he goes, what do you want, young man? I said, how about I don't know, whatever. So he gives me a drink. I feel a hand on my shoulder and I hear a voice I had heard 1,000 times imitation wise. Red, you taking care of this young man? I look up, there's Jimmy Stewart, the actor, which for your young listeners probably don't know, but he was the biggest. He was like the George Clooney of his time. So I go, Red goes, yes, he is. So he goes, hi, I'm Jimmy Stewart. I go, Mr. Stewart, my name's Jim Stewart also. I go, you don't know how many imitations I've heard of you. He goes, how's the real one sound? I said, great. He goes, have you seen Ronnie and Nancy yet? I said, no, I haven't. He goes, come on over. He brings me over to the guy who was just elected president of the U.S., Ronald Reagan and Nancy. So he thinks I know Reagan because I'm at his private cocktail party. Reagan thinks I'm with Jimmy Stewart because he brings me over. So, of course, everybody acted like they knew me. Jimmy Stewart says, Ronnie, Nancy, you know the other Jimmy Stewart, don't you? They go, oh, yes, thanks so much for coming. I mean, it was bizarre. There I am with a guy just elected president. And I remember I came up with something like, how's it feel, Mr. President? He goes, Jimmy, Nancy and I worked hard for this moment. She used to look up at him like a puppy dog, and she was just doing that, And so it was a great way to leave LA. Amazing. We went out on the stage when he announced to the nation that he accepted. I almost got on, but then they figured out I wasn't family, so I had to watch from the wings. But went back to St. Louis, and a bunch of my friends were in real estate, and I said, they seem to be making some money, so I'll get into
real quick, just before we jump into the real estate, on the LA story there with Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
When you were able to do that, that didn't spark anything in you like that made you want to stay in LA or gave you more confidence that you'd be able to make it? Because you being able to get into that party was a huge deal, obviously.
I wouldn't say that because I heard so many no's. And I mean, I'm great with no's, but these were like no's and telling me the odds. I mean, the odds of making it in showbiz, even today, I'm sure are the same. I mean, there's thousands of people, and I wasn't willing to roll the dice and end up being a 40-year-old guy who's worked at a clothing store all his life, who, can't afford his car payment and, lives in an apartment still. I didn't want to do that. Unless it was one of your apartments or mine. Yeah. So that was it. But I will tell you what it did teach me is, if your appearance is very important in sales. I mean, I was dressed impeccably, a conservative suit and tie, short hair. I had hair back then, short. And I acted the part. I just said, hey, I'm supposed to be back there. And she said, oh, okay. And I think the same thing when you're in sales, you have to go into a meeting assuming you're going to get the deal. And because it's almost like a dog can sniff fear in a person, a client can either say, that's a very confident guy, he's the one I want listing my property, or I don't want to do business with the guy. So that's what it really taught me.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So you came back to St. Louis. A lot of your friends were in commercial real estate. And how old were you at the time, roughly?
23.
Okay.
So got into brokerage with a guy who had broken off and started a company. And he taught me the ropes for a couple of years. And I then broke away because I didn't see the benefit at the time of working with a big company. You know, I was brokering office space, warehouse, retail, and you'd have to split with him. And there was all kinds of splits. And I kind of set up a boutique agency. Like I had these great listing books. So if I was going to you and you owned an apartment complex and I wanted to sell it, when I came in to pitch you on hiring me, I had a leather bound book with gold embossing, real
Wow.
leather, with your name and the address embossed on the front of it. You'd open it. I had 8x10 pictures. I had a great marketing plan. And that showed people I was different than these big companies. I was going to produce for them. It was more, who do you list with? Not a big company, but it's the person. And it worked well for me.
I feel like that would work today as well because there's so much that's digital that would make somebody stand out. That it would be very unique. Were you focused on selling apartment buildings at the time?
Not at all. I wish I had been. I mean, I didn't realize the gold in apartments till 10 years, 15 years later, and I'll tell you that story. But at the time, I was really brokering office buildings, retail, leasing or selling, and doing real well. But one time I sold a building out on Manchester Road. I'll never forget. Fireman's Fund Insurance, a AAA tenant, occupied a big building on it, and it was on 9 acres. And I sold it to a lawyer in St. Louis who was an investor and put a group together. He bought the property. And I saw him about 6 months later. I said, Jim, how's the property doing? He goes, it's great. He goes, I just sold off all the extra ground for the same thing I paid for it. So now I own the building with Fireman's Fund, paying big rent, free and clear. And that was really a defining moment for me. I thought, man, he's making a lot more than I made on the commission. That I made a nice commission on the deal, but nothing like his cash flow for years, the tax benefits, things like that. So that's when I started thinking differently, that ownership is the way to make money in real estate. And I've always had my sons in real estate, and I have a lot of friends in real estate. I've always said you can make a tremendous living, ordinary income, brokering real estate, but you'll never get rich. You'll get rich by owning property, and generally for a long time. The holding period is so important. I mean, very little real estate goes down over time. So,
and I will say, you mentioned your son's in real estate. If you don't mind me saying, Parker Stewart.
Absolutely.
He's. I met him maybe 10 years ago, the first time, maybe 8 years ago. It's been a while, but he's one of the. I would call him a monster, and in a very positive way. Like, he is a go-getter, one of the best brokers I've ever met. So I'm sure the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Thank you. I mean, I'm amazed by him. I look at him and I see myself exactly when I was that age. He gets up, he goes to work early, he works late. He's intensely focused in a lot of things. I mean, he has huge integrity, which a lot of people in their 20s and 30s don't. He won't take a listing to sell an apartment complex unless he knows he can move it. And so there's a lot of things that, and I've told him from my career, but he's doing a lot better than I was when I was 31 years old. So I'm very proud of him.
Yeah, he's awesome. And they're doing great things, building up that Northmark office in St. Louis. So I'm glad to finally meet his father. But just to continue with your story, when that spark happened and you realized that you want to be an owner, did you immediately drop brokerage and look to become an owner, or how did you work through that?
That's a great question. I didn't drop brokerage because brokerage provides you a lot of leads on things. You can't, there's a conflict of interest. If I'm selling a building for you, although a couple of times I bought buildings from people I was selling them for, but everything was on the table. Hey, here's the amount, I'll pay you the listing price, but there's kind of an inherent conflict of interest because I'm trying to get you the best price for your building. So, but you hear about a lot of other stuff. And so I still brokered for several years, but my first apartment or my first investment deal, I found an office warehouse building from a client of mine, one of my mentors, the guy who brought me into Enterprise Bank. And I told him I wanted to buy the building. He said, okay, here's the price. It was all on the table and we bought it. And that was the first property I bought.
And this was before or after founding Enterprise?
This was before.
Okay.
He was the founder. His name was Ron Henges, and he was a wonderful mentor to me. He was kind of Mr. St. Louis. I mean, this guy knew everybody, very successful business person, and he took me under his wing. And he's one of my two mentors that I just can't be more grateful for. I mean, they really helped me along in my career.
What was your role in some of those early deals that you guys were buying?
I would manage them. So right after I bought that office warehouse deal, then I was handling a building downtown for a fellow. I shouldn't say his name, but he was very wealthy. He had invented the extended warranty on appliances.
Wow.
And then he sold out. I think at the time he sold out for $50 million in 1985, which in today's dollars are what, 200 million? I don't know. He had a lot of money. He wanted to buy real estate. I had sold a building for him. He said, I want to buy office buildings. So we went around St. Louis. We bought in partnership 6 or 7 buildings, including the LaSalle building downtown, which is 16 stories, and a bunch of other buildings. And we ran them, and everything was great until early 92. The office market really went to hell. Badly. And I had cash calls, and I was a young guy. I mean, this guy had a lot of money. I had cash calls where at the end of the year for property taxes, I'm coming up with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I just went to him one day and I said, Bernie, I can't do this anymore. Would you be willing if I gave you all my interest in all the buildings? Because we had some great ones, but we had some really bad ones too. I'll just give you my whole interest. And he said, okay. And that helped me. I mean, completely. I mean, I could have gone bankrupt, and it was a very kind gesture on his part. I'm sure he wasn't just dying to do that, but he did it. And after that, it really taught me something. You can't give office space away in bad times, you know? And if you do lease it to somebody, then you spend huge money fixing it up for them. Warehouse are the same, but apartments, you can always lease an apartment to somebody. There are very few costs to fix it up. And if somebody doesn't rent it, you can lower the price a little bit and you will rent the apartment. So I started looking for, because I had sold some apartment buildings and I saw that, but I hadn't bought one yet. So I started looking for apartment buildings to buy.
And when you started to look for apartment buildings to buy, how did you start that search? Like, given the fact that you were a broker, were you directly reaching out to property owners?
Yes. At the time, I think I was going through the St. Louis County tax rules, and somehow they had the largest residential deals on there. And I came up with one in South County, very big project, 400 units. And I called, and it was owned by a real wealthy guy. And he had a very sharp CFO who handled the negotiations. And I negotiated and got a price. And I'll never forget. When I went in to remove my contingencies, I thought, well, I'll hammer them down a little bit on some items. And I sat there, I said, I'll do the deal, but I want 100,000 off for this and 100,000 for that. And I'll never forget this guy. His name is Wayne Smith. He's still around St. Louis. He looked across the table and just burst out laughing. He goes, Jim, are you crazy? He said, I have about 20 buyers behind you that will pay me a lot more. I said, Wayne, we got a deal. Forget I said that. But I did have a little of a problem then. I had written in the contract with a HUD loan. And as part of the deal, I think I paid $10 million for that. And I wrote in a $600,000 commission, 6%. I was going to use that as my down payment. About a month before closing, the HUD folks said, we're not going to allow that. We can't tell you why. It seems excessive. And if you want to, protest or get somebody to review it, you can, but it's going to take months. So I was really almost out of the deal. I needed $2 million down payment. Well, I had a friend down at Stiefel Nicolaus, an investment banker, Joe Schlafly. And I'll never forget, I told him about it. He goes, well, you need to get low income housing tax credits. So what are those? Well, I didn't know what they were. Everybody knows what they are now. Back then, nobody really knew what they were. In fact, in 1996, the state of Missouri allocated $28 million to tax credit deals. I got 16 million of it
Wow.
for the whole state because nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
And Joe put it together. So I bought Covington Place with the tax credit. That was my down payment. Now, the bad news about that, it's two bad things. You have a partner who buys the credits and they're really your partner. And number two, we had to keep a certain amount of, I think it was 64% for low to moderate income folks, which is great, except this was in South County where it was a fairly affluent area. So we were always trying to fill up the tax credit units, we call them, and then the market units. And you would also have people like you and I could be living right next door in a building. You're a market rate person. I'm a tax credit person. You're paying $700 for your apartment. I'm paying $500 for the same apartment. People didn't like that, So there's a lot of conflicts in that. Luckily, and I guess I've always been lucky because reading is kind of my hobby, but I've always read a lot of things. So I'm reading some business magazine and I read about something that says after 14 years of a tax credit deal, if you do a few items and you wait a year, if nobody wants to buy your property, no more tax credits. You go to market rate. And I looked at this and I called somebody and there was a consultant in St. Charles and she knew all about this. And it was crazy. So I had to put Covington on the market. At the time, if somebody had paid the price that I put it on the market, I would have jumped on it. I put it on the market. Nobody came in because it wasn't advertised. This is kind of a fluky IRS thing that they, just said, and if you don't get a buyer, it goes to market rate. So overnight, I had 400 units, went to market rate. I bought out my tax credit partner who had, really a discount. I mean, and I did a big rehab on the project, refinanced it, got all market rate people, and still own it. I mean, and I remember times at Covington when I'd sit in that office on a Saturday if the leasing agent didn't show up and I'd lease apartments. I remember going door to door to collect rents at one time until my wife made me not do it anymore. But that property today, I bought it for 10 million. It's worth 40 or 50 million today, depending on who you're talking to.
Sure.
So that goes back to my thing about all real estate. You hold it that long, it's going to do well.
And this was you bought it in 96. You refied around 2010, and you're saying the value today is 4 or 5 times what you paid in 96.
At the height of the apartment market a couple of years ago, it appraised at 50 million. I'm guessing it's worth 40 now, but I'm not selling until I die. So
I don't know. I feel like there hasn't been as big of a decline in pricing from the peak as some people may think. So I would bet that number's still a lot higher than 40.
I get calls every week about it, and buyers. So I'm really, and we pour a lot of money into the property. We really keep it up well. I really care about our tenants. I have a full-time person who does our social media and surveys of tenants. We survey every tenant. You move in, someone will call you. 6 months after you're in, someone will call you. 3 months before you renew your lease, somebody will call you. Make sure things are good. If they're not, we make it good. And all our employees there, we've had long-time employees. So I've really been lucky with Covington. The other big property that I bought in 98 that I still own is Cape Cod Village in Peoria, Illinois. And that's interesting. That was it's around a 12-acre lake, but it was really a neglected property owned by a bunch of lawyers in Chicago.
Before we jump on that deal, can we talk about your decision for why you brought your property management in-house and why you put such a big emphasis on that piece of the whole puzzle?
That's a great question, Raj. Initially, I brought in 3 different management companies to manage the property. But I really saw none of them manage it like they owned it. Nobody's going to manage it like an owner. And there were so many things that weren't done, so many dollars that slipped through. And after 3 different ones that I fired over the course of a year and a half, I just said, I'm going to do this myself. I found some good people, hired them, uh, and we manage both of them. We have 28 people between the 2 properties. And, I'm sure absentee owner maybe wants a third party management company, but when you're hands on, you want to, you want to keep your finger on the pulse of everything that goes on there. And I know those properties like the back of my hand, after all these years.
That's awesome. So, Peoria, just going back to that, didn't mean to cut you off, but I thought that was an
that's all right.
important point to make. That deal came about a couple years after Covington.
Right. I bought Covington, and then I decided I kind of like the apartment business. So I'm going to become an apartment mogul. So I sent out 10,000 letters to brokers all over the country. I'm a buyer. I'm looking for apartments. And I started getting things in from all over the country. Found one in Peoria I really liked, went up there. And at the same time, I was getting divorced, and I had 3 little kids, and I had to make a decision. I said, do I want to be an apartment mogul and own hundreds of communities and travel all the time and never see my kids? Or do I want to see my kids every day and I can still do this? And the answer is I want to see my kids every day. And it still worked out great. I have wealth beyond that I ever thought I would. But way more important, the wealth of my family and the wealth of friends. And, it all worked out great. But at the time, I was very, very ambitious. And, but instead, I said, I'm going to really concentrate on these.
So, when you made that decision, how old were you roughly?
I would have been 40.
That's I think an early age to make that decision, which I think is the right decision. But I'm just curious, kind of how you truly came to terms with, you being such an ambitious guy and you viewing ambition as like growing a business or, acquiring more assets, and then making that mind shift change to my ambition or my life is better served serving my family, friends, things like that. Like, what was the main catalyst for that, aside from some of the challenges with, the divorce and things like that?
Well, I think I realized that I really didn't want partners. And I own these properties just myself. I didn't really enjoy managing people. I just didn't. And to get an organization to build that big, you have to spend a lot of time managing people. And I didn't want to do that. And I still worked very, very hard. And I still did a lot of other deals besides the apartment deals. I brokered for many years and redeveloped. I bought an old Chrysler dealership and sold that to Harley Davidson. And I did a lot of deals like that. So I was busy. I was making a great income and building wealth through these big communities, the 2 apartment communities. And but it just, I look back at that time, and your priorities just come to you, hopefully. And it was crystal clear that I'd rather than travel all over. I mean, I remember sometimes hearing people brag about how much they traveled on business. Hey, I was gone 24 days this month. And I thought, what an idiot, you're missing life. So I was lucky to have those priorities straight, I think, and I'm sure happy I did.
I resonate with a lot of that, especially the wanting to spend time with your kids and not miss out on them growing up. But then also, I feel like for people that are very entrepreneurial, most of them don't like to manage people. They like the freedom of being creative and things like that. At that point, did you ever think like, I either need to stop, maintain what I have, or grow really big to where I don't have to manage people and I have, managers managing the people, or was that not really something?
Well, that's what I have now is managers at the property managing everybody. But I think the way I had envisioned growing it was to own a couple hundred apartment communities, and then you'd have massive regional managers here. And I just, number one, I didn't want to spend that time away from my kids. And number two, I didn't want to manage people because I'm the type, I will do my job. I will work harder than anybody. I will get my job done. And I expect everybody else to do the same. And they don't. I mean, many do, but they don't. So I just decided that I'd really stick with what I really know and work real hard to making the best apartment communities I could. And I went to all the conventions, and I've always operated my communities as a big owner rather than a small owner. The National Apartment Association, I spoke 7 years at their national convention on a panel of, there's a couple of us in the country that know each other, and we run our properties like big owners. We have, pricing. I've been doing pricing software that resets the price every day on a apartment for 15 years since they started doing that. And a lot of other technologies I've embraced that, and some haven't worked out too. But I've always tried to run things like with a big company mindset, but keep my company small and manageable.
That's awesome. I have something for you after we're done with this in terms of something we're working on that I think you might appreciate as someone that cares about apartment operations.
Oh, great.
It's a AI tool that we're playing around with answering our phone calls and stuff like that.
Oh, that's
So,
great. I love that kind of stuff. It's
yeah, and the dynamic pricing. I mean, to be using that 15 years ago, that's incredibly impressive. It's I would say it's maybe in the last 3 or 4 years that it's been massively
Right.
adopted or mass adopted. You briefly mentioned the Chrysler dealership. That type of deal, can you walk us through how it came about and how you had the foresight to do the conversion you did?
Sure. Well, Covington in South County is unique in that it's off a busy street, Lee Ferry, but as you enter the property, to the left is a little strip center. Well, at the time when I bought Covington, the owner said, you have to buy the strip center with it. I didn't want the strip center at the time. Um, I wasn't into retail, but I had to buy it. That happened to be a great thing because I still own that strip center, and I carefully control what goes in there because it's the front door to my property. I mean, even now we get calls every week from smoke shops, massage parlors, tattoo shops, and we always say no. We want businesses in there that can serve the 1,000 people living in Covington. So that's right there. But right behind there and up on Lee Ferry was an old Chrysler dealership. And it sat vacant for like 2 or 3 years. The guy from Chrysler wouldn't even call me back. He was out of Tennessee. And I had to just keep on calling and different people. Finally, I got it under contract. I bought it without a tenant in mind and about 5 acres. But this was adjacent to my property. And I showed it around to a lot of different people and had some people close. And then a guy with a Harley Davidson dealership. It was the 100th year of Harley. And he said, this is kind of a dive building. I'm going to put a lot of money into it. He said, you're lucky because if I had more time, I'd build my own building, but I have to have this up by the 100-year anniversary. And it was so lucky. And so I sold that off to him. And, I bought an office building in Westport Plaza and sold that a couple of years later after I leased it up. So I had pockets of things that happened. One of the best things that ever happened in my business career, believe it or not, was Mother's Day of 2003. I woke up and I had a call, and a tornado had wiped out half of my property in Peoria. So at first I panicked. I told my wife, I got to go check our insurance policy. I got in the car on Sunday morning, drove to my office in South County. I'm leafing through things, and it's good. Tornadoes are covered. So we went up there. It was devastated. It's a 200-unit community. There were buildings completely wiped out. There were buildings half wiped out. There were some buildings where just one full exterior wall was wiped out, and you'd look up at it, and it was like a kid's dollhouse. You'd see all the furniture and everything. There was a dumpster full of drywall that we had on our parking lot that we had. It was found a mile and a half later on a roof of a building.
Wow.
Get that. So I had no idea that tornadoes were that powerful, but they were. But here's the good news. I had great insurance and nobody was hurt because they had said on TV, if you're watching this, your life's in dire danger, and we had basements in the building. So people went there and there were people in the basement. The whole buildings got blown up, but nobody got hurt. So I had great insurance. It was a pain the next 12 months rebuilding, fighting with the insurance company. I think I was American Family Life Insurance biggest claim in April of that year in the country. And
Wow.
they don't want to pay you out, so I had to hire a insurance adjuster who's like a lawyer, but I ended up rebuilding. Best thing that ever happened to me up there. We had much better units, and at no cost to me, except the mental cost of doing it for a year. So again, I always say the harder you work, the luckier you get. And other people say that. And that's a case of where we got lucky. And I did work hard the next year to get it back. And, we ended up building 2x2, units, 2 bedroom, 2 baths that we didn't have and things like that. So it worked out great.
Buying an apartment community is a very different skill set than building an apartment community. So when you're doing things that are relatively new to you, I know you had some other real estate experience as well, but if construction was kind of new to you, were you bringing in third parties that were experts, or were you trying to tackle it yourself?
No, I'm a strong believer in you bring in the best and don't do it. So I didn't do anything. Well, yeah, that was from the ground up where some of the buildings were, but I just brought in, good architects and good general contractors and let them do their job pretty much. When I was rebuilding those, I really traveled around to see, what's the hottest thing in apartments now. And people are really great. They're willing to share with developers all over the country. I mean, I look at what's working and what's not, but in answer to your question, no, I let the experts kind of do that.
Sure, sure. And I know we've gone past it now in terms of timeline, but I'd like to jump into the story of Enterprise Bank,
Well,
if you don't mind sharing how that idea came about and what your role was in it.
Okay, as I mentioned, this fellow Ron Henches was just. I started handling real estate for him. I remember I called him on a building, and he said, "If you're a broker, don't come out and look at this. I've had it with brokers." I said, "I'd really like to come out. Maybe I could find a tenant." I went out, met with him. He signed the listing that day with me. He liked me. He said, "You seem different," and I produced for him, and we became, I mean, like a father and son in many ways. This guy did more for me in my career. Just wonderful. And one of those things, he got me appointed to a state board, Missouri Development Finance Board. That was a appointment by the governor, and it was a very prestigious appointment. A bunch of real estate and banking folks. We would go to New York and buy bonds for the state of Missouri, and it was a kind of a sophisticated financing tool. It's still around. It's one that like they raise money for stadiums and things. And Ron got me on that board. And then one day he called me and said, "Stewart, come out to my house tonight. We're going to start a bank." So I said, "Okay." Went out to his house. There were about 7 or 8 people in his basement. And he had the idea at the time, all the banks around here were really corporate banks. He said, "I want to start a bank that really caters to the small to medium businessman." So we did it. We started. We raised some money. He raised most of it. I raised some money. I remember, and he made me buy stock in it. And at the time, I'm 27 years old, and he made me buy a certain amount of stock. He said, "You'll be happy you did this now." And as I told you before we started, that stock was $1.66 a share. It's now publicly traded at $51 a share. I wish I owned all mine still. I've sold off some over the years, but he was right that. But I got a great experience because he also put me on the board of directors. So I'm the only like non-multimillionaire at 27 on this board of heavy hitters. And I'll never forget, before the first board meeting, he brings me and he goes, "Stewart, keep your mouth shut and you'll learn a lot." I said, "Okay." And I did. And I learned an awful lot from all these high-powered business guys. We looked at all the deals that came through the bank and, people's financial statements. Boy, you learn a lot about a financial statement because you learn that it isn't always what it appears to be. There were certain people here in town that one developer in particular, he's in the newspaper every day. You'd think this guy was, like, no, I don't want to say Donald Trump, like Trammell Crow or somebody, I saw his financial statement. I mean, he had like a negative net worth, and he's like listing his furniture at his home on there and everything. On the other hand, you get these financial statements from people nobody ever heard of that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that in St. Louis that you did. So it was quite an education to see that and see the deals and see how the bank structured deals. And it was a great experience. And it's still a great bank.
Yeah, I haven't done business with Enterprise, but my interactions with everyone there have always been amazing, and they do a great thing. Enterprise University, I think they call it, where they
Absolutely.
educate small business people. It's pretty cool. They have some good speakers for that series.
Yeah.
I'm actually signed up for a few. I think they're coming up in a week or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I think you'll enjoy them. They do a good job.
The shut up and listen, I'm paraphrasing there, but that piece of advice I can really relate to, because like a conversation like this, I'm really enjoying learning from you, and I'm just trying to shut up and soak it all in, because there's so many bits and pieces to take home. We like to end each show with what we call a hole in one, which is similar to what I was just saying. It's your greatest piece of advice that you can give people, listeners, viewers, that they can implement in their life or their business. You have a lot. So if you want to give more than one, feel free. But we usually ask for at least one piece of advice.
I think the biggest one is to stay positive. Like I've always told, like I told my son Parker before he got in the business, and anybody who's ever asked me about real estate, I said, you have to have an iron gut. That means, especially in real estate, really any business, but real estate more than others. You work on a deal, you spend months of your time, emotion, you're ready for it to close, and then it drops flat. The deal's gone. It just happens in real estate. And you have to have that iron gut where you don't say, I'm in the wrong business. Maybe I can't take this anymore. And maybe you should be in another business, but the ones who stay and succeed in real estate have that iron gut. I always compared, there was a movie a long time ago named Cool Hand Luke, and a guy named Paul Newman was a huge movie star. And he was this guy. And in the movie, it's like a Western, and Paul Newman's like 5'10", and he's up against a big cowboy about 6'6", and they're ready to fight. So the cowboy knocks Newman down on the ground. Newman gets up, kind of dusts himself off, goes over. The cowboy knocks him down again. And this happens like 5 or 6 times. Every time Newman gets up and he's a little more ragged and, and teetering. And then finally he gets up and hits the cowboy and knocks him out. And that's how you have to be in real estate, and really, I think in life. Not everything's going to go your way, and you have to keep positive. I think I have a strong faith in God, and I think that's a huge part of my personality and part of my success, because I kind of see business as it's great, but money doesn't define me. I look at somebody and say he's successful because he has kids who love him, he has a wife who loves him, he has grandkids. That's real success. Money's a lot of fun. But I once read a great definition of money. It said, money does not bring happiness. Money brings comfort. For example, so I have a little money. So if driving over here, I had a flat on the highway, I would not sit in front of my car and wait. I'd walk to a store, call AAA, they'd come fix it. And somebody who didn't have any money would probably have to fix that flat themselves, or maybe they didn't have a spare. And, that's comfort. But happiness, I've known a lot of very wealthy people, money-wise, that are very unhappy. And I've known people without a dime to their name that are very happy. So I'd say that's the biggest piece of advice, is don't let money define you. It's a benchmark in business. It's just natural. People think that, but it's not in life. It's what kind of person are you?
Jim, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.